The Honourable Rod Caddies.
Thank you, Acting President. Now, betrayal. That's what this budget is. It's betrayal. A betrayal of the trust placed in the Cook government by the people of Western Australia. A betrayal compounded by 8 years of austerity under Labor. A betrayal of workers, our education system and our health system. A betrayal of West Australians who want to be able to have a roof over their head. A betrayal of this great state of ours. As we probe this budget, we must reflect on Labor's fiscal legacy, particularly under the McGowan era, where the precedent of reckless austerity was set. This government's track record shows a pattern of over-promising and under-delivering, and this budget is no exception. The McGowan government's $1,000 public sector wage cap rolled out in 2017 was sold as a fiscal discipline. But it hurt Aussies, hard-working nurses, teachers and police officers, whose real wages eroded as living costs soared. Speaking of teachers, who can forget the education cuts of 2017 and 18? Classrooms were stripped of resources, teachers were stretched to breaking point, and parents were left pleading for better conditions and resources. McGowan himself admitted in 2019 that those cuts went too far. A rare moment of candour from one of the most despicable governments ever to lead this great state. These were not actions of a forward-thinking administration.
I'll just interrupt a debate to remind all members that other members of this parliament or previous ones are referred to with their correct title.
The Honourable Mark McGowan. Sorry, Acting President. These were not the actions of a forward-thinking administration, but a panicked response by a debt crisis Labor failed to address. While they shouted about budget surpluses, Western Australian families felt the pinch of a government too afraid to invest in their future. My friend, the Honourable Colin Tinknell, was a vocal critic of the McGowan government's $64 million education cuts in the 2018-19 budget. He rightly called out the foreseeable harm these measures inflicted, particularly on regional families and students. As he noted, 20% of those cuts targeted agricultural education, impacting schools like Cunderdin, Denmark and Narrogin Agricultural College, forcing 1,800 families to find an extra $700 a year to fund their children's education. These are just not numbers. They were real costs to real families, undermining access to quality education in our regions. Now, a quote from Colin: "This is what happens when education departments take over businesses. They do not understand the value of the people they employ." His words resonate today as we scrutinise this budget, ensuring it does not repeat the mistakes of prioritising fiscal savings over human impact. The McGowan era's obsession with austerity didn't stop there. The cancellation of the Perth Freight Link in the 2017 was dressed up as a populist win, but it left our freight network in limbo, redirecting funds to a Metronet project that ballooned in cost and ambition. This pattern of betrayal continued into more recent years, where misplaced priorities only deepened the damage. Perhaps the Cook government is too busy spending $2.3 million on inclusion strategies. When people are struggling to be able to have a roof over their head, I'm sure millions of dollars is well spent to instruct them what pronouns to use. This budget has been described as an infrastructure budget with enormous amounts of money being spent. And yes, ultimately, that is the job of the state government, to ensure that there are enough schools, hospitals and services to maintain the standard of living of our citizens. To ensure that we do not experience a drop in our living standards, governments do need to engage in long-term planning and thinking. But long-term anything does not come naturally to governments, as they always care more about the short-term popularity. They care about elections and polling. This budget announced significant spending in health, education, energy and infrastructure. This should be good news. However, it must be noted that the huge spend is needed because of the lack of investment and the very bad, poor priorities over the past 8 years. When the McGowan government was elected in 2017, it was based on the promise to reduce debt and be responsible financial managers. To them, fiscal discipline was all that mattered. The state was asked to tighten its belt and endure some austerity. But in typical Labor Party style, they were too zealous and lacked the ability to think far enough ahead and understand what the unintended consequences of such austerity would be. Why would a public servant stay in their jobs if they were not being paid fairly and the mining industry paid twice as much? So the consequences of the wage freezes was a brain and talent drain on our police, nurses and teachers. Between 2017 and 2020, the WA state government was all about not spending any money and to squeeze our public sector to the point where it was almost choked out. Cuts were made to government departments, investment in social housing stopped, upgrades to hospitals and schools were delayed, and efficiency dividends were demanded across the whole of government. Efficiency dividends are a blunt tool. The government asks all agencies to deliver more money to the government, and how they do so is not so important. I wonder what ideas came across the desk at Goldcorp to creatively return more money to the government. Maybe they considered diluting gold in Perth mint bullion. Indeed, One Nation called out the McGowan government on its budget repair measures in 2018. One Nation warned that the cuts on education, health and law and order would result in big problems. One Nation called on the McGowan government to recognise that the provision of adequate health, education and law and order is core business for government and that it should be immune from budget repair measures. But we were ignored, and now, 7 years later, we have acute crisis in health, education and law and order. The period between 2017 and 2020 saw a massive attack on the public sector by the McGowan Labor government, laying the foundations for the period of 2020 and 2023. We remember what became of our state during those COVID years. That was a wild time. Not many people like talking about it now. The McGowan government did not let this crisis go to waste, and the missed cult of personality was happy to spend huge amounts of money keeping us safe. The panic buying of the rat kits by the McGowan government probably wasted over $300 million on items that went to landfill. That alone probably ate up any savings the Honourable Mark McGowan's austerity measures delivered. Honourable Mark McGowan COVID policies also ruined the lives of countless West Australians, from vaccine mandates to cooking the construction market, to the huge number of small businesses and associated livelihoods that were destroyed forever. And guess who had to carry the load during the pandemic and enforce all of those bad policies and live with the poor decisions? That's right, frontline public servants who still had their wages frozen. No wonder so many police, nurses and teachers left the jobs they loved. It happened.
Members.
Taking huge amounts of experience and wisdom with them.
When the chair speaks, please direct your remarks through the chair. This is not a conversation between members. Thanks. Then after COVID, we got the next grift from Labor, record mass migration. To paper over the economic destruction caused by COVID policies, the Federal Labor Party opened the floodgates to let as many people into Australia as quickly as possible. This influx of people was not designed to resolve shortages in teaching, nursing and policing. It was designed to keep property prices high. The influx of people did not result in more houses being built. It resulted in making the housing crisis worse.
Well, the houses for those doctors and nurses and many essential workers, is that what you're talking about?
I'm not taking interjections, thanks. Because of the reckless austerity of the McGowan government between 2017 and 2020, there are not enough classrooms or hospital beds or police on the street. Of course, migration is important, but if you bring in too many people too quickly without investing properly in services and infrastructure, you end up with what we have now, a significant decline in our standard of living. We need to maintain investment in health and education infrastructure. These are not things that can be neglected. If you do not keep up with the investment, you fall behind, and then it becomes a very hard thing to regain prior standards. This betrayal is evident in the current budget's fiscal mismanagement, where surpluses are squandered amid rising debt. The Treasurer boasts of surpluses of over $2 million annually, yet net debt is skyrocketing from $33.6 billion this year to $42.5 billion in 2029. Despite boasting of a seventh consecutive operating surplus of $2.5 billion and further surpluses averaging over $2 billion annually, the Cook Labor government is allowing net debt to explode to $42.5 billion, another betrayal. This stands in stark contrast to the mid-2000s, when under previous administrations, a projected $1.27 billion operating surplus was actively used to pay off major debt. Today, Labor squanders these windfall surpluses, which are fuelled by iron ore royalties, not their policies. They spend them on spending sprees while net debt rises by nearly $9 billion over the forward estimates, saddling families with higher taxes and interest burdens. Compounding the betrayal, Labor relied on quantitative easing crutches, selling $7 billion in WA Treasury bonds directly to the RBA during the pandemic, artificially lowering borrowing costs and masking their deficits at the expense of inflating the economy and driving up living costs. The RBA's own data reveals this quantitative easing scheme ballooned state bond issuance to over $130 billion nationwide. Yet, instead of using today's surplus to repay this debt mountain, Labor lets it grow, prioritising pet projects over prudence. It's a deliberate choice to betray West Aussies, leaving our children with a legacy of debt instead of assets. This $9 billion increase is happening during another boom in our resources sector. Iron ore royalties are pouring in at record highs, as the budget papers confirm. But this is thanks to our resources sector, not Labor's genius. And where is the money going? Not to easing the cost of living for ordinary West Aussies, that's for sure. Unemployment is forecast to rise from 3.7% to 4.25%. That's more families out of work, more pressure on our welfare, and no real plan to create jobs in the regions where they're needed most. Regional communities get scraps. The Royalties for Regions Fund, once a lifeline, is now gutted to use to prop up general services that should come from consolidated revenue. One Nation stands for putting royalties back into the regions, fixing roads, building hospitals and supporting local businesses, not funneling it to projects for city votes. The betrayal extends to misguided spending priorities that fail to address the immediate needs in key sectors. Meanwhile, small businesses, which employ thousands across our state, receive minimal support beyond the $400 small business energy bill relief. Where is the investment in helping small businesses thrive in a tough economic climate? Western Australia's population is growing at 2.4%. outpacing the national average of 1.7%. This growth fuels demand for skilled workers, yet the budget's response is inadequate. The $1.8 billion for education and training includes funding for TAFE, but completion rates remain stagnant despite increased enrolments. One Nation calls for targeted support to boost TAFE completion rates, including incentives for employers to retain apprentices. Labor wants to try and bring in skilled workers by relocating them to Western Australia. The $10,000 relocation bonus to attract workers are a short-term fix that fails to address the systemic issues. Why not invest in training our own youth in regional areas? Instead, the state government wants to put more strain on our crippled housing supply by increasing demand through increasing population. Perth's median house prices doubled from $500,000 in 2017 to over $1 million now. Rents are up 76% or $740 a week. Families are spending 58% more of their income on rent if they're earning $70,000. Why? Uncontrolled immigration. Net overseas migration is fueling demand, pricing Aussies out. One Nation says cap it, prioritise locals. We need targeted regional housing, not endless Perth expansion. Immigration is putting more strain on our already struggling health sector. Elective surgery wait lists are up from 19,000 in 2017 to nearly 30,000. Ambulance ramping, as we've heard from many members, is breaking records. And we've seen back in 2016, I remember it vividly, the Liberals were being attacked for having huge ramping hours, and now we've got a crazy amount of them comparatively. The budget attempts to throw some money into the WA Health, but frontline services are still strained. In the regions, it's worse. Flying doctors stretched thin, hospitals understaffed, mental health gets lip service, but youth suicides rate in the bush are heartbreaking. We need real investment in regional facilities, not just Perth hubs. The centralisation of this budget over supporting rural and regional Western Australians goes even further. We question the $133 million for environmental initiatives when practical measures to support our farmers and regional industries are underfunded. One Nation believes in protecting our environment, but we must balance this with the needs of our primary producers who feed our state and drive our economy. We call for a budget that prioritises practical, common sense investments over flashy projects that benefit a select few. At the heart of Labor's betrayal is one overarching solution: cutting immigration to relieve the pressures it creates. Every problem mentioned in this speech could be solved by it. If we cut immigration, we would be relieving the pressure on our health system, freeing up houses for West Australians, young and old. No problem with immigration, just over-immigration, mass immigration. We've got too many people coming in for our infrastructure. Ensuring we have enough energy to maintain the needs of West Australians. And we would stop the urban sprawl expansion of Perth. We should be encouraging migration, yes, but migration within Western Australia. Encouraging people within Perth to move to the regions, not immigration into Western Australia when our people are struggling. Rapid population growth overwhelms infrastructure, leading to higher public spending and reduced productivity. The budget's $38 billion assets investment program over 4 years includes surges like $636 million extra for Western Power and $1.8 billion for education and training, partly to cope with migration-induced demand. Health gets $1.4 billion more, but regional hospitals lag, with migration exacerbating wait times and costs. Labor says they need mass migration to keep up the Ponzi scheme that is increasingly becoming our economy. But studies show migration's fiscal impact can be negative short-term if inflows exceed infrastructure capacity. Treasury forecasts note shaky migration predictions, potentially underestimating strains like traffic congestion or school overcrowding. I said at the beginning of this speech that this budget was a betrayal, but it goes deeper than that. The betrayal by Labor at both federal and state level, allowing mass migration to swamp the finite infrastructure and resources of this state and nation. This betrayal of our people leaves Western Australians homeless. It leaves our health system unable to keep up with the needs of our citizens. This betrayal means we have an education system where teachers can't keep up with the huge numbers of students in every class.
Member, I will interrupt your debate and I will leave the chair until the ringing of the bells.
Rod Caddies.
Thank you, Acting President. Now, I started out this speech with it was a betrayal. This betrayal means my children may never be able to purchase their own home. One Nation will not stop calling out the Labor government or any other future government for the things they are doing wrong or the things they aren't doing what they should be doing. We will always hold the government accountable for their actions, and I think I'll finish up there and cut it short for today because there's some important bills we're speaking about this afternoon that I'm going to leave time for, so thank you.